Hello, this is Jason Mundragon. Welcome to my podcast where I am taking on everything in the universe and making it comprehensible to the collective consciousness. In this episode I will be giving realizations to the intelligence seen through its evolutions. I understand that I give this information in a very direct form, but like many others I struggle to make sense of the flood of communication on these topics from all the various sources. Most teachers have a tendency to find portions of absolute truth and just advance upon their knowledge. Whereas I wish to connect it to something larger. I am not through learning, but this is what was conjoined through my lifetimes of spirituality. I know it will continue, but now is our time as a collective to know, and grow. And so, let's get started. If you were able to understand the role of the Pleiadeans, then you have realized one of the many players that have moved our societies through generations. This was not the first time they have presented themselves. Coming from Earth they can connect with us better than beings from Holy and the Anunnaki. The Pleiadeans have a rich history of leading and awakening beings here on Earth. They prefer to never be around conflict and so tend to disappear when corruption infects anyone around them. We know clearly that their most current connections would be with the forming of the Kabbalah and Theosophy belief systems. They were in fact the direct influence of the Enochian lineage. They teach always of a path to self-evolution and communicate through an enlightened form of universal pulse. Their intentions are always good, yet the humans they attempt to connect to are generally incapable of fully comprehending them. Depending upon the consciousness of the individual, they can become lost in a deeply emotional hymn of self-created visions. They always come in their truthful forms and do not hide their true appearance like many other beings. The Pleiadeans led a portion of collective beings into the Indus Valley after the deluge. This was a prosperous and quiet life for a time. Eventually trade would develop between the Persian and Egyptian territories. They were led by Murugan, which was openly known as king of the Pleiadians from the Pleiades star cluster. The early Hindu people possessed special attunements that was developed over time to be able to understand the Pleiadian form of communication. What manifested was the Vedic understanding. This belief structure would propel consciousness for the first time unaffected and unknown by the outer universe. With the Vedic understandings and the yugas forming, this laid the groundwork for repairing a now damaged plane of mind. I dare not give an in-depth guide to the yugas but will refer any truly wanting to know more to learn this from the great Indian sage known as Sadhguru. The new knowledge brought forth the awareness of consciousness beyond the earthly life. The yugas taught us of our spiritual evolution, of which superseded and was of times far before the earth had physical form. It has always been these forms of the original root races that the Holy Alliance has wished to guide into the collective consciousness. Whereas it has always been the beings from the outer universe to divide these newly formed consciousness and subjugate them to corruption. The Pleiadeans taught only from what their developed consciousness could. They are disconnected from the whole of the universe. An effect that occurred when they sacrificed form and have never again taken bodies, a continued flow of consciousness without experiences. They are among the few beings that are of pure light and gave up much of their past by choice. They are now the guardians of the infinity stream. The beginning stages of water's evolution was when life was still developing here on Earth. Universal mind already had the knowledge of how to form sentient beings, for it had done quite well with the star beings millions of years beforehand. Please see the earlier graph of the plane of mind. All that is below the center point is of physical development. The ones of water's evolution moved about throughout the lower realms many lifetimes attempting to develop. I will speak of the right side first. Lower planes in the collective universe. The planes of stimulus, emotions, and thoughts is where self-stimulation would give to them a sense of belonging to their environments of which they existed. Stimulation on these levels would be procreation, that would mean growth and survival. The plane of stimulus is a plane that is the raw nature of physical creation. One may think that society urges us into procreation, but it is something much larger. Many sages and spiritualists seek to control this urge, for some have come to learn it beacons even the most evolved minds. To conquer this urge, would take on the power of trillions of voices within the physical form, but also a genetic collective that has existed for millions of years. It is obvious without this stimulation that we would rarely populate. Even now we have species of animals that have very low stimulation to breed and are always placed on endangered lists. Here we will find that the plane of stimulus has given little energy to these forms to procreate. Through the universal mind they are no longer considered important within the greater scheme of life. We tend to look at these events and consider our responsibility of causing extinctions, but if they are needed, they would find a way to evolve to meet the demands of evolution. The only part in this we have responsibility from is when we outright hunt a species to extinction for unnecessary needs, as in the whale population. There are many others. In considering how we outcry about an endangered species, we tend to not place any need for them other than our overwhelming concern. This bears little interest to the plane of stimulus, and anything without purpose will likely fade into existence. This urge is without fault. Both sexes will have an intimate internal calling at many points within their lifetime. There is perfective evolved circuitry that gives an intense pleasurable sensation to this act, but in truth, it is the plane of stimulus that gains ownership of the form. In the event that more than one physical form adjoins to perform acts of procreation, the plane of stimulus will send out a signal to the universal mind through DNA pulses. It will acknowledge the forms and decide what genetically these forms can give to the process of sentient life on the planet. Our truest fault would be when we force a stimulation of growth within a species for our personal needs. We take control of this species and take it away from the universal mind's control. This will evolve a species into an overpopulation, and many diseases will continuously sprout up in attempt to control this growth. The species will become fast-tracked in their mental awareness as well. Even cows are known to cry for weeks when their babies are taken from them. There is a distinct knowledge of what suffering their lineage will have. We need not look further than man's best friend. The majority now have a very clear understanding of their responsibility to us and view us as the center of their world. Each plane possesses subplanes but will not be looked at in these writings. The plane of stimulus manifested with the birth of mitochondria 2.4 billion years ago. The threat of extinction through this era is what consciously causes stimulus to always be at the ready, assuring that should global destruction occur, there will always be enough life to rebuild. Trying to conceive the number of mitochondria we possess within each individual body is mind-boggling. Mitochondria are responsible for converting food into energy for our cells, so they can be considered farmers and tenders to the cell's nurturing and growth. Now consider that each cell can possess anywhere from 500 to 1000 mitochondria depending on the type of cell. Lastly, now consider that there is roughly 30 trillion cells in each body. Within each of our physical forms, there lies a universe of mitochondria that will combine as a collective. We refer to this as a mitochondria central mind or many voices, only coming into complete unity when stimulated by complete pleasure through deep ecstasy of various kinds. This could include deep mental states of ecstasy while performing many different activities. Otherwise, it tends only to its individual parts as it is capable. Should a particular portion of our body's cellular structure fail, and the mitochondrion central mind isn't aware, then that portion of body will fail no matter if it sets off a chain reaction and harms other cells. Positive nourishment of this mitochondrion mind will be primarily to acknowledge its existence. Corruption will attack the plane of stimulus foremost, for it will be easier to fragment the other structure to the form, meaning our body. I will go over these events in the outer universe part of the lower realms further on. We love to seek pleasure of our experiences here in bodies, and generally the most fit are indeed the most active. Finding pleasure in simplicity and calm is a great way to counterbalance mitochondria. They have evolved to believe activity equates to progression of the species. Find pleasure even if at first it is something that must be learned. Trillions of voices will cry out, but will easily adhere to your wishes when not corrupted. This will bear great insights into scientific fields of study, especially when considering the natural selection theory and how activity equals higher lifespans and healthier bodies. I leave this for the scientific community to further research. The last I can add is that the highest evolution so far of the plane of stimulus is directly manifested and in connection in what we call dopamine, and its well-known effects on the body. Daniel Lieberman, a well-known paleoanthropologist, has an incredible array of literature that points to any seeking further understanding. The plane of emotions. This is where pleasure begins to be sought out and pain avoided. It is said this is what we all seek really, and many of Eastern philosophy attempts to bring this to light. We exhaust great amounts of force to grasp onto people, places, and items. Throughout the day, this is how we secrete ourselves into the physical world. These emotions on the collective side of the plane seek to overindulge in these feelings of bliss as we identify with them. What we do, how it's done, and with whom, has deep meaning to us. All that we connect with, our organizations, our jobs, and our families possess the utmost meaning. We fabricate an illusion of permanence. We tend to segregate ourselves, however, when in true reality we don't need to grasp onto anything or anyone. The human form is a part of all things already in the physical realm. Sex, hobbies, and many activities will take on an identification that gives to us a feeling of being right with our environment. The difference between the plane of emotion and that of the prior plane is that stimulus is deep within and only extends to the shell of the body. The plane of emotion seeks to amass more things around it and give to it a feeling of wholeness with its collections. Physical items that the form has claimed gives to it a further sense of pleasure, with it the pain of losing these items. Things that humans have come to love throughout their lifetimes will inevitably give a false sense of desperation to be maintained and well cared for, due to worry of losing a piece of themselves. This is of course the highest level of this development. Emotional control is what most sages and mystics sought to achieve, for many realized that emotions had direct impact on the environment in which they existed. We are attuned to these energies to different degrees. This is the prime reason for the saying, like attracts like. For even if we lie to our internal self and give off the outward glow of happiness yet are deeply depressed, we will attract the same types of people into our lives. Those who are truthfully happy will be felt by all other sentient beings and will pull in positivity from many dynamics of which they exist in. The true purpose of meditation is to consciously improve the positivity of the world around you. It was truly stated that one Buddha can save millions. The plane of emotions was created around 580 million years ago with the evolution of the multicellular organism. These were animals, land plants, and most fungi. Moving higher from the mitochondria's central mind is the now cellular central mind. This mind encompasses the many types of cells within the form and is very capable of awareness to the world around it. This cellular central mind is the reason why many types of species tend to associate among themselves, for there is a communication on cellular levels many aren't aware of. Just being among those that appear as similar gives to the cellular central mind a sense of calmness and belonging. This was developed long before consciousness came into the scene due to the harsh environments and the need to survive among their societies. With these societies came a collective understanding of what was good, and what was bad for them to evolve. All that was learned was directly linked through DNA and recorded by the universal mind. When environments were shown to be unworthy for growth and DNA had recorded similar experiences, those advancements would be made. However, should universal mind deem the organism unworthy and other forms had more possibilities, then they would go extinct. These experiments have been shown in what we call the morphic fields experiments. It is fundamentally the cellular central mind communicating to the cells currently, and soon to be created. The emotions plane is one of action. It is directly associated with the reactive mind, reptile brain. It takes on a quick response to things in their environments that could affect them. Whenever consciousness is sleeping, unawakened, or direly ill, it takes over the body's function in various ways during these times. It will take control of the body during what we call the fight or flight response when the consciousness becomes disconnected for any reason. What's needed from us is to understand its functions and monitor its activity. There are natural tensions that form when it is under duress, and natural elevations of temperatures when fighting illness. We must give allowance when it is doing good for bettering the body and pay attention to any signals it is giving throughout the form. Laughter is the best medicine for the cellular central mind. Through humor it views all of its idiosyncrasies as relatable to all and not just itself. The mystic Alan Watts has a perfected ability to cue in and directly shed light on the plane of emotion, making it laugh collectively. The plane of thoughts. This is the advancement of this reptile brain. It formed around 260 million years ago with the evolution of mammals. If you are following this, you will become aware that these planes were formed at the point in water's evolution when they received what I called conscious impulse. The source of consciousness works in shared understanding with universal mind. When the situations were primed for this conscious impulse, consciousness touched form. As I have stated, this was perfected long ago, and sequences will always follow the same path for sentient creation. If left to prosper at this point, a process would have taken life forms on the same path that star beings had gone through in other stars' systems. The outer universe has succeeded in corrupting a large percentage of their societies. This is why I believe the omni-conscious decided to advance this evolution early. For reference, the omni-conscious resides above and is reflective in the source of consciousness and the universal mind. Much like the human form, on an overview they appear to function for the good of the whole. Looking at their individual parts, however, they function for self-progress. In an earlier episode I spoke of a time around 260 million years ago when our solar system collided with a dark nebula. This was in fact a physical attack from the outer universe to corrupt life that was in its beginning stages of formation here on Earth. In the process, the dark nebula spread water's DNA across the collective, settling on many star systems known by us. This damage caused the universal mind to place a barrier into higher forms of understanding. It was the way in which it could contain the corruption. We as the collective call this the wall. It is seen in the 2D graph as the middle gray line. If beings from water's evolution wished to gain deep insight and truth, they would have to evolve in a specific way and conditioning to be permitted into greater being status. However, through great strides they eventually found ways to gain entry through complete observance of the mind through Eastern thought. Within the plane of thoughts, water beings were able to hold on to their individualized experiences. This mammal mind superseded the two lower minds and dominated them, eventually placing them in a slumbering state of mechanical repetition, only surfacing at key moments when they are needed. This mind will hold a continued recording of all experiences and affect the other lower minds into believing all that it experiences. It is here where the birth of the ego was formed within our dual evolutions. One would argue that this basic brain lacks the ability to think, however, I am not speaking of formal organized thought patterns. This mammal brain retains memory through experiences, shared or individually. It has for the most part been like a being existing throughout lifetimes without visual capabilities. Feeling its way through existence, being fed what it experiences as real, it manufactures its reality on a mental construct. The two higher brains will eventually form, but it is within this brain that will determine the pathway in water's evolution. Lower planes in the outer universe. Here we have the planes of stagnation, superficial, and mechanical, which is on the lower left side of the chart. I realize much of this information I'm presenting is new to the collective, so it would be hard to formally comprehend the outer universe, but eventually all will become clear. The outer universe has been in existence before the beginning of the collective universe. In a sense, it sees us as a threat to be fragmented and destroyed. Since the outer universe existed before the beings here within the collective, it should be understood as a primordial slumbering force with no activity for progression, yet slowly digesting itself. Much like a cancer on a portion of our bodies, if not cleansed then it must be serrated from the form. Akin to a parasitic nature, once the collective universe manifested, the outer universe reawakened and began to feed off it whenever possible, developing more ingenious ways to do so over time. The outer universe has developed pockets of dimensions which overlap the known universe in many areas where collective consciousness occurs, spoken of extensively in the first book. I now, however, want to give to us the history when water's planes manifested. The plane of stagnation is very much what it would be conceived to be. Here and on other star cluster, due to the most extreme climate conditions, DNA would collectively go into a deep comatose state for very long time spans. This can be manipulated and triggered by the outer universe on a global scale if allowed, if not watched closely. This stagnation will manipulate the creative powers of collective beings and manifest environmental conditions that add to the loss of growth. When early ancestors prayed for good crops and blessed conditions, they were seeking to never become affected by stagnation's corruption. Much of the outer universe's affluence in water's evolution is in the physical realm. The beings lack the proper means to defend themselves against such force while still young spiritually. Since stasis naturally occurred within the collective, the outer universe was able to take on a corruptive version in stagnation. The plane of stagnation can manipulate form on the very basic levels, manipulate gene pools, block DNA strains, and cause confusion within the mitochondria and their social structures. It does this, when they are in a stasis-like condition, that used to occur naturally throughout the glaciation periods. The dark plane now actively creates these conditions through manipulation of the ego when purposelessness is felt, leading to loss of participation in living, in general, up to even suicide. We have often spoke of being imbalanced chemically. This is perhaps more deeply true than realized. The plane of superficial. This is where the concepts of aloneness come from. We fabricate different levels of concepts that we alone exist above all others, or even that no other exists at all. All are deeply viewed as a means to our individual needs, and we truly have no real concern when we no longer have need of them. This is truly viewed in the animal kingdoms among some that truly have no interest in the loss of life, for unless it impacts their individual survival, it really has no means of concern. This plane manifested to hinder cells' communication to one another and other forms within their environments. In today's world it mostly corrupts race personalities, the sexes, and different nationality. It whispers fears that others are to be forbidden to coexist and that this would destroy its purity. This blocks what we are meant to do and join experiences collectively to prosper. It is a thing that is felt, but rarely spoken of, that if elevated will manifest into racism, sexism, and national pride. We are living in moments in history where this is manufactured before our eyes, even knowing how many tragic wars have sprouted up from in recent past. It is because we are not looking consciously at the plane of superficial which allows it to push forward with its corruption, in a continuous stream of dividing the collective. The plane of mechanical. This takes all these negative concepts of the planes of stagnation and superficial and concretes it into a construct of how the world is, following with each incarnation as it deepens the corruption of the soul. As stated, beings stuck within the outer universe continuously rotate in the plane of dark. They are never able to receive new conscious input from a reincarnation, which happens only in the collective universe. This is how the beings from dark are formed. Within these plane biological, mechanical, and technical manufactured concepts are formed replacing truth. It is only when they completely submit that they take on the characteristics of an entity and lose conscious connection of a being's status. I hope this will give us some enhanced understanding on the outer universe. I will move my consciousness to other places now and end it here. I will now give a brief history of the plane of Psyche and its influence to assist water's evolution to gain higher forms of intellect. The plane of Psyche. I would like to give more insight on the plane of Psyche and its influence on water's evolution. To start, I would like to give a closer look at the plane of mind and its direct connection to the plane of Psyche. And so, I present the plane of Psyche within another graph and where it connects to the plane of mind. This will also explain its influence. Though not considered a formalized religion, Hermetic philosophy touched the many truth seekers throughout the ages of intellectual thought. Hellenistic, Gnostic, and yet rooted in Christian influence, it brought forth fundamental structure to evolving spiritual understanding. What's not truly known is that spirituality was never the goal. It was a time when the universal mind incarnated upon the planet to guide sentient minds, in the form we've come to know as Poe-Mander. It must be understood that when dealing with beings of such magnitude, generations of time may be influenced. I will attempt to help with this comprehension and will need some time to form these thoughts. Beings such as the source of consciousness and the universal mind are direct manifestations of the omni-consciousness, perhaps better understood as a reflection of its omniscient persona. Conditions are usually manifested for these beings to form within or influence the physical realm. These conditions are rarely known to collective consciousness, only felt in conscious impulses for those few capably attuned. Understand this, however, such manifestations will almost never occur within a single physical form. A manifestation of such beings will transgress possibly generations, giving its knowledge slowly to the collective evolutions, so that greater beings, plural at times, that are deemed their voices may be so for a multitude of lifetimes. This is what occurred in the greater being we knew as Hermes Trismegistus. Once servant of the dark magi and the one we know as Thoth, he was privy to knowledge many awakened beings never had access to. The Emerald Tablets is thus historical documentation of his passage and lifetimes as he was able to free his bondage from the dark magi. It is not my place to speak on the specifics of the Emerald Tablets, for it was written in a way that will only harmonize with a consciousness that has evolved enough to understand its secrets. I can tell you, however, that it was amassed through many lifetimes of Hermes throughout the region, as he took on many different identities. He was of greater being status and knew well what knowledge he needed to become a perfected being. Once guided by the universal mind, his powers far surpassed that of the dark magi. They no longer could wield powers against him. The universal mind sought him out to become prefect to the plane of Psyche, a title once bestowed to our revered Logos long ago. With Trismegistus blending his experience within the Akashic halls, new modern conceptual structures would formulate. The plane of Psyche would connect to the plane of water and the plane of mind in new understandings. In the end, the Hermetic principles would form as a reflection of the plane of Psyche. I realize I perhaps make this sound very simplistic, but this was in fact thousands of years in the making, ranging from 6 to 5000 BCE to 500 BCE. Hermes, now blessed as a voice to the universal mind, would be reincarnated many times and renamed as a god by the people of each era. This would coalesce with the writing of the Kybalion and the three initiates. The outline of the Hermetic laws is in fact the initial groundwork to gain access to the higher plane of mind. It was blended in a way to be understood, as the universal mind softened its views and permitted the barrier of mentalism to be loosened to reconnect with water's evolution. I doubt many are unaware of these laws, but I must give them briefly to continue. For us, they are called principles in this era. Note that these laws correspond with the universal mind and advances insight into the source of consciousness. Hermetic principles, laws of the universe. 1. The principle of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. 2. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. As within, so without, as without, so within. 3. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. 4. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles and everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same, opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet, all truths are but half-truths, all paradoxes may be reconciled. 5. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows, out and in, everything has its tides, all things rise and fall. 6. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause. 7. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything, everything has its masculine and feminine principles. If you are among the few who are new to these principles, I invite you to further your study on this topic within the Kybalion text. I have contemplated after this series giving an understanding to that which was before us and below our evolution, but when that arises, I may decide. As for what presses forward, It will be the connection with the higher plane of psyche and lower right side of the plane of mind. What incentivized the universal mind to manifest was the outer universe taking on direct influence of the one known as Ahriman. Taking up from the Indus Valley where Murugan and the Pleiadeans were assisting with conscious evolution. Eventually through trade with the Persians and Egyptians the dark beings would become aware of conscious influence in the region. The remnants of the Anunnaki resided in Egypt, no longer in their original post in what was now Persia. Now unprotected, the outer universe revitalized ancient Mesopotamian and the Iranian polytheism beliefs with what would be called Zoroastrianism, Mazda-Yasna originally. Zoroastrianism originally formed in Iran and was created by the Dark Magi to subjugate the followers. Through wars some would relocate in the Persian areas. Zoroastrians would take on their own struggle as later the conscious beings within would internally struggle to cleanse their belief structure with that of the influential corruption. This is a history only those well versed on Zoroastrian history can account for. Consciousness is scattered at times. All that is clearly known is the emergence of the personification of Ahriman, and the period of detailed height of his worship around 1110 BC. The Persians' defeat was many years before this, but in essence it was the defeat of the Dark Magi by the Plane of Dark. The Dark Magi retreated to Egypt and took to a deep slumber, while this new pantheon took over leading the followers. Within Indus Valley, the Pleiadians would retreat back to their homeland. As stated, they are very non-aggressive and shy away from any conflict. The Vedic philosophy would then be taken over by the universal mind and become structured, for the universal mind had great interest in protecting this understanding. Eastern belief would be propelled evolving into two branches, Shainism which would parent the well-known Confucianism and Taoism within China. And the next branch Jainism which would lay the groundwork for Buddhism to later form within India. Jainism developed by the Eastern intellect to detour the beginning threat of Ahriman's influence within the Indus Valley territories. This was done in many tactical ways by the corrupted forces. With their continued invasions disrupting the villagers' peaceful existence, they harmed any semblance of conscious growth. This in turn would harm the climate conditions needed for a deeply entrenched agricultural society. Once corruption had taken root, the rivers dried up. The leaders of the Indus Valley knew well what was to come of their once great cities. They took it upon themselves to write down their sacred knowledge of the Vedas in what we know now as the Upanishads. The once lower realms of the plane of mind would be given new life with the reconnection to the higher plane of psyche. Stimulus polarity, emotions vibration, and thoughts correspondence would stimulate higher forms of understanding within Eastern philosophy and the new emerging Asian societies. Stimulus polarity. Basic stimulation, advanced in its conceptualizations. The central mitochondrion mind found a new form of complete harmonization within the Eastern conscious beings. This meant intimacy took on new understandings. The Kuma Sutra Sanskrits come to mind. Dwelling deeper into the merging aspect with one another, this particular branch was able to build societies that had little sense of individuality. For all was done for the whole of society and far beyond your lineage. These were strict cultures with little use for those who would fail. In fact, it was seen as an honor if one would simply end their life for the better of the whole. Though seen as brutal at times, this awakening still possessed the underlying narrative of unification which still gave the outward appearance of great structures within the societies. Emotions vibrations. The birth of the formal meditator, emotions were seen as disharmonizing distractions to the mind. One sought to free themselves of the internal chatter. This also gave the added advantage of cleansing any corruptions attempting to influence them. Emotions were now seen as directly influencing the physical realm. Great care and responsibility over this power was reawakening. Many martial arts and yogic practices took on deeper meaning of conditioning the mind with the body. This always brought into awareness the first three of the Four Noble Truths, even if they were not formally called such. 1. The truth of suffering. 2. The truth of the cause of suffering. 3. The truth of the end of suffering. Water's evolution was now able to confront suffering. They knew what caused it as they were able to confront the dark beings through their practice. The cellular central mind would harmonize with the body as it would cease to listen to the primitive brain. Water's evolution would now just seek an answer as to how to permanently rid themselves of the corruption. Thoughts correspondence. The awakening collective consciousness would call forth the Buddha. Any familiar with this incarnation knows well that he reincarnated many times as a greater being beforehand. A prince that was born with an auspicious and grand prophetic future that would not be denied. He would see suffering and become determined to find a path beyond it. He would in fact become the first perfected being of water's evolution from here on earth. And create a pathway to succession with the added fourth noble truth. 4. The truth of the path that frees us from suffering. Again, For those who are unfamiliar, I urge you to learn of the life of Siddhartha Gautama and realize how great the blessings are that we still can understand his teachings in today's world. It is through the later understood Eightfold Path that mind was presented a direction to higher consciousness. Most of the planet at this point was falling into a collective acceptance of the emerging sciences, with the presence of the universal mind felt. The Eightfold Path brought consciousness to our fast-paced growth and broke the barrier of mentalism for those seeking such freedom. Once achieved, always graced into the higher planes of mind. I am well versed on the topic but must refer you to the great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. He possesses great teachings and literature of the Eightfold Path. 1. Right understanding. 2. Right thought. 3. Right speech. 4. Right action. 5. Right livelihood. 6. Right effort. 7. Right mindfulness. 8. Right concentration. This was how water's evolution would be led out of suffering and into liberation if they were willing to put in the work. I will go further in depth later in this book. Where was Earth's evolution during this time? With the universal mind still present, it superimposed itself on our evolutionary forms. The activities of the world had become nothing more than an everlong dream. Very few events would shake them awake as they lived out their lives and their delusions. The planet would come to believe that deeper insights could only be realized through the very private Eastern world. Fortunately, the universal mind would leave with the awakening of the Buddha. Mentalism and the wall. This knowledge isn't just for Earth, but for all of water's evolution to comprehend what has been, and what may come. Water's evolution is all of our now genetic makeup. It is part of all beings that originated here, as well as the star beings that have forgotten their deeply rooted pasts. Those of us in this universal family that have just started developing consciousness after developing millions of years on faraway galaxies, are now influential of this collective consciousness. What is known or learned will be part of all of us, and so we can hinder or help this growth process. It must be our goal to assist in conscious creation to make a whole, fully developed oneness. In the days when Jesus walked the earth, the collective accepted what we think of as magic. Before this, it was abundant as we creatively manifested our world to monolithic beauty and societies that did not have any of the materialistic desires we now possess. It would have been easy to perform the miracles that Jesus performed, for the collective accepted these powers without blocks. Jesus spoke to us and said that we too possess such powers. We must know this. When organizations, influenced by other than consciousness, took over and deemed that they alone possessed such powers of creation, we fell into this false belief, hence infecting the collective. Water's evolution then believed they reclaimed their powers of creation through hard sweat and knowledge as they tinkered and manufactured our societies. Now in modern eras, through industrializations and technological breakthroughs, we believe powers of creation to be performed by the hand and not consciousness. We cannot grasp that it must first be consciousness that manifests these creations, because we believe it can only be done through physical means. We do not accept when we wish for something and it manifests, that it was simply our wishes made real. Now the collective consciousness operates as possibilities, as many of us only believe in what we can see, and what we see we need to explain. The plane of possibilities is deeply explained in the first book, Consciousness, Earth's Evolution, Spiritually Realized. This is the predicament. We know the truth from reincarnation to the way in which life manifests, from ghosts to extraterrestrial life, and yet we do not believe these truths before our eyes. We accept what we see in the world of entertainment as false, so that when truth stands right before us it is incapable for the minds to grasp it. We play along with what we are told in our religions because it gives us a sense of being a part of something. On rare occasions some touch source and lay witness to truth and are either shunned or steered back into adherence to the organizations. Now fathom that this has occurred in many of our reincarnations and you will truly understand why we have become this way. Humans are unique in that most of us must be retaught with each new birth as well as given new consciousness. This alone shows that we are not only of universal mind like the insect kingdoms and some of the animal kingdoms. The corruption uses this re-teaching as a molding to glue us to what is accepted reality. For the traditionalist, this may be most problematic, especially now that as we awaken, we have parents that raise their children as non-gender identifying, which is a great way to open us to truth. I can only say to these societies that expand gender consciousness, please grow. To become stuck and conditioned is the easiest way to see only the physical realm and forget all that we are. Our mental constructs are what hold us down from freedom. To conquer this wall of mentalism will take an understanding of all that we were, are, and will be. We must confront the planes of thoughts, mentalism, and knowledge in specific ways. These paths are more akin to deduction than outright acceptance, for this is the path that the Buddha opened for us. We see this deduction in the main three paths of Buddhism now. for each derivative grasped onto their leaders, and as each group grew, they began to debate one another's concepts of truth. We must look consciously to understand these paths, for even though they originated at particular times within our history, there are reasons for this, and I will attempt to explain. I take liberties to speak on these schools of thought, but I do so from my conscious views and do not call myself a master known to any branch. I quite well understand each viewpoint and believe all possess a path to truth. I do feel that all branches should be encompassed to realize the full spectrum of the Buddha's beauty. Mahayana. Knowledge, 1st century BCE. Theravada. Mentalism, 3rd century BCE. Vajrayana. Thoughts, 6th century BCE. It must be understood that Buddhism derived from a combination of Vedic and Jainism beliefs. This is encompassed in what we call Sramana. I spoke of these just before the Buddha's awakening. These branches of Buddhism formed opposite of the plane of mind's chart, which is thoughts, mentalism, and knowledge. I believe this was due to the Buddha already surpassing mentalism and that this has reflected his consciousness downward into the physical realms. As the Buddha continued his path towards liberation, his form struggled to move upwards while simultaneously holding the weight of all sentient beings, for he was the first to unlock this path for water's evolution. The first also to have the great compassion to want to, for many before him freely did this alone. I will give to you the outline of each branch but invite you to do your own research to fully realize the philosophies. Remember, if beings are working from the physical plane, they must confront the path in this order: Vajrayana, Theravada, and then Mahayana. Most masters in these schools have accepted all three for they realize truth, but this cannot be true for all followers. If you happen to be already associated with a particular school, then most likely you have already grown past the blocks of mentalism and are now working towards higher growth. If you are born into a belief structure within any of these schools and cannot seem to find realization, either one, you have already achieved the understandings and want to learn something else, or two, it's not for you to learn at this time. Each school is individualized in its structure for conscious advancement, but remember that all beings possess Buddha nature, and even in the most remote unsophisticated tribes there is consciousness. Vajrayana places great emphasis on the use of certain tantras and traditional spiritual techniques in order to obtain enlightenment as quickly as possible. According to Vajrayana supporters, the ultimate goal of Buddhism can be most efficiently realized through these practices. At the same time, some of these techniques are considered too advanced or even dangerous for the uninitiated. This lends a strong inclination towards secrecy in Vajrayana and makes it even more difficult for non-practitioners to understand. Vajrayana Buddhists claim that their view of Buddhism is identical to that of Gautama Buddha's, but consciousness alone holds these truths and is left for individuals to conceive. Some tantric practices are, according to Vajrayana, too dangerous for a layman to learn. They are either prone to abuse, easily misunderstood, or simply dangerous. This is why Vajrayana believes Gautama Buddha practiced these techniques himself but did not teach them to others. As a result, Vajrayana functions somewhat like a mystery religion. Only those properly initiated and sworn to secrecy can learn the deeper secrets. Needless to say, this lack of openness makes it extremely difficult for non-practitioners to learn about Vajrayana. Noted distinctions of Vajrayana would be: 1. Use of ritual objects. 2. Use of meditative visualizations. 3. Mandalas or sacred designs. 4. Mantras or sacred chants. 5. Prayer wheels. 6. Rosary prayer wheels. Through the plane of thought we see the real hands-on approach to Buddhism as it is still at the precipice of the physical realm. Many of water's evolution would dedicate lifetimes in service to these techniques until fully realized. Many times, awakening occurs far before this as consciousness rises. This may also be the place where conscious beings who have lost their way seek a stricter control over themselves when needing to self-correct their views. Theravada emphasizes individual enlightenment. This is called an arhat or arahant, which means worthy one in Pali. An arhat is a person who has realized enlightenment and freed himself from the cycle of birth and death. This is done by understanding the nature of the self or anatman. Theravada teaches the anatman to mean that an individual's ego or personality is bound to delusion. Once freed of this delusion, the individual may enjoy the bliss of nirvana. Theravada teaches that enlightenment comes entirely through one's own efforts, without help from gods or other outside forces. The primary means of realizing enlightenment in the Theravada tradition is through vipassana or insight meditation. Vipassana emphasizes disciplined self-observation of body and thoughts and how they interconnect. Breathing techniques and observations are very much the way in which the Buddha meditated. Noted distinctions of Theravada would be: 1. Emphasis on attaining nirvana through meditation and a process of perfection through purification. 2. Emphasis on the virtue of wisdom. 3. Encompass the ideals of an arhat. 4. Buddha is seen as the supreme teacher and inspiration to achieve nirvanic state. 5. Only for a select few, generally monks and nuns. Here we find the core of the plane of mentalism. It is where we truly look inward and realize the constant arising and activities of thought forms. When viewing them as an observer, we can have many realizations of how we have been influenced to construct a fabricated world. Consciousness arises from this disillusion that we have identified with for so long, and we seek to merge this new awakening with our existence. Mahayana tradition teaches that all beings inherently possess Buddha nature, called the seat of awakening, and thus perfecting the qualities of a Buddha. These qualities can remove hindrances to realization even within a single lifetime. The Mahayana spiritual model is the Bodhisattva, who is motivated by bodhicitta, the desire to awaken to help all beings realize their true nature. The Buddha in Mahayana is eternally present in a pantheon of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and enlightened beings who can be called on for support. Mahayana schools teach practitioners to cultivate the paramitas, qualities such as generosity, morality, patience, concentration, and wisdom. They understand that all beings and phenomena are empty of inherent existence and arise only interdependently. Shunyata, or emptiness, is a central teaching in the Prajnaparamita, Perfection of Wisdom, Sutras, fundamental texts of the Middle Way school. The related doctrine of two truths holds that the everyday dualistic world of appearances, relative or conventional reality, and absolute or ultimate reality, emptiness, are not separate but one, unified. They adhere to the Yogacara, the mind-only school, that asserts that reality in any form is a mental construct. Continuity of the phenomenal world is ascribed to a storehouse consciousness. Noted distinctions are thus: 1. Emphasis on the compassion of Buddha for all creatures. 2. Encompass the ideals of a bodhisattva. 3. Emphasis on the Buddha nature. The plane of knowledge now expands and encompasses all living beings and the realization that all life is of importance in the conscious collective. All should survive in a universe free of suffering, and this very realization becomes one of action to assist in this until all beings are free. To encompass these schools in a universal consciousness isn't just to combine them, for each can individually shed light of the true nature of reality, but to look beyond the wisdom for what lies beyond. When looking at water's evolution and its path to consciousness, we can now review all that it had gone through to reach this height. Through Hermes Trismegistus and the plane of Psyche, water's evolution gained higher forms of material enlightenment in the Hermetic philosophy. This ancient wisdom laid truth to the universal mind and all physical forms it oversaw to create sentience in the universe. Once this was viewed and seeped into forms, it would awaken the slumbering conscious collective, and they would seek to rejoin once again as a whole within universal understandings. Eventually this calling brought forth individuals who would awaken to this cause. Over thousands of years, conscious beings would awaken and add pieces to this design through many forms of thought as they struggled because they fought the wall of mentalism. Then the pure love determination of the Buddha would succeed in finding a way over this hurdle and open this pathway to all of water's evolution. We must understand that this liberation from form was so much more. With this realization being gifted into the collective, all beings were able to reincarnate with consciousness once again and supersede water's evolution to take their place as active participants here on Earth. The source of consciousness could freely send its impulses to Earth's evolution, no longer hindered by the physical realm. The universal mind and the source of consciousness in their own ways guiding both evolutions towards a goal of universal consciousness. I will continue with the plane of mind's pathway into further enlightenment once I have been able to join this understanding with that of the corruption from the outer universe. To start, I must explain the multitudes of sentient beings that exist within the known universe and beyond, so that we have a universal understanding. It is not my place to make anyone believe. All that I place within the collective will one day be fully grasped, even if it takes a full unveiling one day. If you enjoyed my podcast, please consider helping my progress in any way. Please feel free to contact me, or subscribe, find me on my social networks, share, like, and of course any monetary assistance will be placed back into my work. I am a new author of just under a year and have really made my work completely within reach at just 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. The information is more important than anything, but everything helps in a collective way. Thank you again.